Warning: the following content may contain elements that are not suitable for some audiences. Accordingly, viewer discretion is advised. Between 1975 and 1980, a man killed 13 women across the north of England. He was interviewed by police 9 times during that period. 9 times. They sat across from him. They took his statement. They let him go. He left a boot print on one victim's leg that matched his exact shoe size. Investigators had it. They didn't follow it up. A friend reported him by name to the police. The paperwork was lost in the backlog. A £5 note found on one of his victims was traced directly to his employer. He gave an alibi. They accepted it. Peter Sutcliffe, the man who would become known as the Yorkshire Ripper, later said at his trial that it was, in his own words, a miracle that police hadn't caught him sooner. That they had all the facts. He was right. This is the story of 13 women, a catastrophic police failure, and the most infamous manhunt in British history. A manhunt that became almost as notorious as the crimes themselves. Peter William Sutcliffe was born on June 2, 1946, in Bingley, West Yorkshire, a quiet, withdrawn boy in a working-class family. He was unremarkable by almost every measure. He left school without qualifications. He worked a string of laboring jobs, including, notably, as a gravedigger at Bingley Cemetery. Colleagues later recalled him handling corpses with an unsettling familiarity, joking about the dead, touching them unnecessarily. In 1974 he married Sonia Surma, a schoolteacher. They lived together in Bradford. To their neighbors they were a quiet, ordinary couple. Sutcliffe worked as a long-distance lorry driver, a job that gave him legitimate reasons to be anywhere in the north of England at any time of night. His earliest known attacks date back to 1969, 6 years before his first murder. He struck a woman over the head with a stone inside a sock in Keighley. She survived and didn't press charges. He attacked at least 3 more women with a hammer and knife in 1975 before he crossed the line into murder. Each time, the women survived. Each time, nobody connected the attacks. Each time, Peter Sutcliffe drove home to his wife in Bradford and went to work the next morning. On October 30, 1975, Sutcliffe murdered Wilma McCann, a 28-year-old mother of 4 who had been out drinking in Leeds. He offered her a lift, drove her to a nearby recreation ground, struck her from behind with a hammer, and stabbed her 15 times in the neck and stomach. His method became grimly consistent. Approach from behind. Hammer to the head. Then a knife or screwdriver to the torso. Emily Jackson. 42 years old. Leeds. January 1976. He stomped on her so hard during the attack that he left a boot print on her leg, a boot print that matched his exact shoe size. Police had it as evidence. Nobody followed it up. Irene Richardson. 28. Leeds. February 1977. Patricia Atkinson. 32. Bradford. April 1977. Then came the murder that shifted everything. Jane MacDonald was 16 years old. She was not a sex worker. She was a shop assistant who had been out dancing with friends in Leeds on the night of June 26, 1977. Police publicly referred to her as the first innocent victim. The implication was explicit and damning, that the women who had come before her were somehow less innocent. That their deaths were less worthy of outrage. That a sex worker killed by a violent man was a different category of tragedy to a schoolgirl killed by the same man. This attitude, baked into the investigation from its earliest days, would have devastating consequences. By 1977, West Yorkshire Police had assembled a major incident room to coordinate the Yorkshire Ripper investigation. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in British history, eventually consuming an estimated 2.5 million police hours and costing £4 million. And yet, at almost every turn, the investigation failed. The sheer volume of information was overwhelming. Detectives were processing tips, statements, and leads on paper index cards. So many cards were generated that the rooms storing them required reinforced floors to bear the weight. There were no computers. No cross-referencing system capable of handling the scale of what they were dealing with. Critical information was being received, and disappearing into the backlog. Sutcliffe's name appeared in the investigation files multiple times. When the £5 note from one of his victims was traced to his employer, he was interviewed. He said he had been at a party. They accepted it and moved on. When his friend Trevor Birdsall filed a report naming Sutcliffe as a suspect in November 1980, the paperwork was swallowed by the system. Sutcliffe was interviewed about the matter, but was not investigated further and was contacted and disregarded by the Yorkshire Ripper investigation on several further occasions. And then there was the question of who investigators were, and weren't, listening to. Marcella Claxton had survived an attack by Sutcliffe in May 1976. She was not a sex worker. She had accepted a ride from a man she didn't know, a common enough thing. She helped police create an accurate photo fit of her attacker. They dismissed it. Because Claxton didn't fit the profile of the women they believed the Ripper was targeting, her testimony was set aside. The accurate sketch of Peter Sutcliffe, created in 1976, sat unused. Police also dismissed some victims who didn't fit into their prostitute killer profile. This meant that when Marcella Claxton, who wasn't a sex worker, survived an assault in May 1976, her testimony was ignored, along with the accurate sketch she'd helped create. The investigation was being shaped by assumptions. And those assumptions were costing lives. In March 1978, letters began arriving at West Yorkshire Police. They claimed to be from the Yorkshire Ripper. Then, in June 1979, a cassette tape arrived, a voice, taunting the investigation, claiming to be the killer. The voice had a distinctive Wearside accent, from the Sunderland area of northeast England. Nothing like Sutcliffe's Yorkshire accent. Police fell for it completely. They played the tape publicly, at press conferences, on radio, in police stations across the north. They invited members of the public to call a hotline and listen to see if they recognized the voice. The entire investigation pivoted. Suspects with Yorkshire accents, including Sutcliffe, who had already been interviewed multiple times, were effectively ruled out. If you didn't sound like the tape, you weren't the Ripper. In 1979, police fell for a hoax tape and letters purportedly from the Yorkshire Ripper, a mistake that had deadly consequences. Sutcliffe had a Yorkshire accent, but the accent on the hoax recording led authorities to search for suspects outside of Yorkshire. Police bought into the hoax even as some survivors informed authorities that their assailant had spoken with a Yorkshire accent. Sutcliffe killed 3 additional victims between the hoax tape investigatory detour and his arrest. 3 more women died while police chased a ghost. The hoaxer, later identified as John Samuel Humble, wasn't caught until 2005, 26 years after the tape was sent. He was convicted of perverting the course of justice and sentenced to 8 years in prison. 8 years. For a hoax that directly contributed to 3 additional murders. On the night of January 2, 1981, 5.5 years after his first murder, Peter Sutcliffe was finally stopped. Not by the vast investigative machinery of West Yorkshire Police. Not by any of the 9 interviews. Not by the bootprint, the banknote, the friend's report, or the accurate photo fit. By luck. 2 Sheffield officers, Sergeant Bob Ring and probationary constable Robert Hides, were on routine patrol in the Broomhill area of Sheffield when they noticed a parked car in the driveway of a business they knew to be closed. Sutcliffe was in the car with a 24-year-old woman. When they ran the plates, they came back false. Obtained from a scrapyard. Sutcliffe was arrested for the false plates, a minor offense. When officers realized his appearance matched descriptions of the Yorkshire Ripper, they began to question him. Before being taken to the police station, Sutcliffe asked if he could relieve himself behind a nearby oil storage tank. Officers allowed it. The next day, Sergeant Ring returned to the scene. Behind the tank, he found a knife, a hammer, and a rope that Sutcliffe had discarded during that moment out of sight. Under questioning, Sutcliffe confessed. He identified himself as the Yorkshire Ripper. He described his crimes in detail. Sutcliffe himself said at his trial, "It was just a miracle they did not apprehend me earlier, they had all the facts." He was right. They did. Sutcliffe's trial began at the Old Bailey in London on May 5, 1981. His defense argued diminished responsibility, claiming Sutcliffe was a paranoid schizophrenic who had been commanded by the voice of God to kill sex workers. Four psychiatrists supported this diagnosis. The prosecution disagreed. They argued Sutcliffe was a calculated, deliberate killer who had constructed a religious justification after the fact. The jury agreed with the prosecution. On May 22, 1981, Peter Sutcliffe was convicted of 13 counts of murder and 7 counts of attempted murder. He was sentenced to 20 concurrent life terms, with a recommendation that he serve a minimum of 30 years. He was sent to Parkhurst Prison. Later transferred to Broadmoor, a high-security psychiatric hospital, after a formal diagnosis of paranoid schizophrenia in 1984. Then transferred back to prison in 2016 when clinicians determined he no longer needed hospital treatment. On November 13, 2020, Peter Sutcliffe died in HM Prison Frankland in County Durham. He had contracted COVID-19 and refused treatment. He was 74 years old. He died having never shown meaningful remorse for what he had done. After his death, West Yorkshire Police issued a formal apology. Not for failing to catch him sooner, but for the language and tone used by the force during the original investigation. The misogynistic attitudes. The division of victims into innocent and not innocent. The women whose testimony was dismissed because of what they did for a living. It was a small apology. Decades late. For failures that cost lives. Wilma McCann. Emily Jackson. Irene Richardson. Patricia Atkinson. Jane MacDonald. Jean Jordan. Yvonne Pearson. Helen Ritka. Vera Millward. Josephine Whitaker. Barbara Leach. Marguerite Walls. Jacqueline Hill. 13 women. Killed over 5 years. By a man police interviewed 9 times and released 9 times. The Yorkshire Ripper case changed British policing permanently. It led directly to the computerization of major incident rooms. The creation of the Home System, the Home Office Large Major Inquiry System, which is still used today. It changed how evidence is cross-referenced, how survivor testimony is recorded, how investigations are coordinated across police forces. All of that came too late for 13 women in the north of England. What the case also exposed, loudly and undeniably, was that the value placed on a woman's life by the institutions meant to protect her could be diminished by what she did for a living. That a sex worker's testimony, a sex worker's survival, a sex worker's death, was treated as less urgent, less credible, less worthy of the full force of investigative effort. Peter Sutcliffe knew that. He said so himself. He knew who the system would and wouldn't listen to. And he used that knowledge for 5 years. Subscribe if this case made you think. And leave a comment. Of all the investigative failures in this case, which one do you think was the most inexcusable? I hope you enjoyed the video and I'll see you in the next one.